a document that the European Commission has called a roadmap to end Russian energy imports. That is why it was sufficient that yesterday the first written opinion was issued from the Ministry of Economy. But as Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic, I feel obliged to comment on this document politically and to inform you of the instructions that will be given to our representatives of the relevant authorities as regards the attitude towards the adoption of the relevant documents. Because one thing is the European Commission strategy, which is called the Roadmap to Ending Imports of Russian Energy. The other thing is what the relevant legislative materials and documents will look like. And the Slovak Republic will have to play an extremely active role in negotiating the content of these documents, because if we look at the content of this document, Slovakia will be one of the countries of the European Union that will be most affected by the fact that the European Commission wants to achieve an end to the import of all energy from the Russian Federation in a relatively short period of time. I said it was good that we had the night to think it over. I even tell you to measure 10 times and cut once, because you have given us a roadmap for ending Russian energy imports that is totally unacceptable to the Slovak government in this form. We shall see how the drafting of legislative proposals develops, because the devil is in the detail. But if we take what is all being proposed here and what the implications might be, and I could quote now from the various analyses that I received last night, at the end of the day, we may do considerably more damage to ourselves, and the European Union may be more damaged than Russia itself. This has already happened with regard to some sanctions as such. Therefore, at this time, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to inform you that in all the relevant negotiations, for example, today the Corps of Ambassadors is meeting, the so-called Corps of Ambassadors, the Corps of Ambassadors. We will certainly actively enter the legislative process with the request that the specificities of the individual member states of the European Union, such as Slovakia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and others, be taken into account, maybe even Spain, more and more. And at the same time, to make us realize what a catastrophe this document can cause in Europe as a whole. Therefore, if the European Commission refers to the Beast Statement, we remind it that it cannot do so because the content of the roadmap does not correspond to this political statement. So what does he propose? As regards the European Commission's roadmap and what it wants to push through legislative changes in the next period, we will again be constructive and will negotiate to the last second. After all, we have signed agreements until 2030, that is 34 agreements, which guarantee the Slovak Republic the import of this gas. We import it today mainly via Turkstream because, as you well know, President Green has stopped the transit of gas through Ukraine. Secondly, we want to say very clearly that there will be capacity shortages in terms of natural gas. If this part of the Russian gas is also shut down, and it does not contradict the European Commission's objectives that, on the one hand, we want to reduce dependency, but by shutting down the Russian gas, dependency on somebody else will be created. It will be primarily a dependence on liquefied gas from the United States. We have agreements in place for these volumes of liquefied gas. What will be the price? Will it not be the case that we will cut ourselves off from affordable Russian gas and depend on incredibly expensive gas from the United States, which will be liquefied? One addiction can replace the addiction of the species, which is totally irreplaceable, unacceptable to us. We are concerned that this decision will lead to further increases in gas prices on the European market, which is against the objective. In terms of being able to compete with the United States, China, or India. Therefore, I repeat once again, in the case of gas, we believe that despite the small volume of gas coming from the east to the west, this gas has a differential character, stabilizing the gas market at the European Union level. With regard to liquefied gas, there are countries such as Spain and others that are dependent on imports of this Russian liquefied gas. Russia is still the second largest importer of liquefied gas into Europe, and 10 member states of the European Union share in the off-take of this Russian gas, that is to say, the 52 billion cubic meters. Russia currently controls 40% of the world market. As I said, the United States itself has been taking enriched uranium from the Russians, and so the question is simply, either we invest, and now listen well, either we invest EUR 20 billion in enrichment technology, which will take 8 years, or we close the plants. Or are we going to continue to negotiate with our Russian partners for the supply of enriched uranium, which we need at the moment for the operation of our power plants? In terms of self-sufficiency with nuclear fuel, we have only 3 countries that are self-sufficient, and that is France, China, and Canada. The Russian Federation, of course. But in this case, I am talking about the Russian Federation as a supplier. Therefore, on that basis alone, we don't have an answer. We can't just take fuel from Westinghouse and stuff it into our nuclear plants. And it needs to make some technical adjustments. These are huge financial instruments. Slovnaft itself was built on Russian oil, and again, you can't just take any oil and process it in a technological way. Technological adjustments will have to be made in Slovnaft. And of course, the most ideal thing for the whole of the European Union would be for us to go to the vote on these documents in a unanimity mechanism. But the most sensible thing would be if somebody stopped liking the new Cold War, if somebody stopped liking the ideas of all kinds of iron supports. This is not helping anyone. And I saw it very rightly yesterday in an analysis from a company in Slovakia, which says that they are absolutely convinced that these proposals, if implemented, will damage the European Union considerably more. Prices will go up. We have nuclear, we deal with oil, we deal with gas, and to provide the European Commission with enough relevant information to convince the Commission, when preparing legislative changes, that the experience of countries like Slovakia should be taken into account, because we are a nuclear superpower when it comes to nuclear. If I take the amount of electricity that we generate, I take from the core that we have as many working reactors as we have. Despite the fact that this extension was declared in the first 100 days of the Commission's activity, it was tabled yesterday, and it also shows the controversy and political sensitivity of the issues. For example, even major Western member states have not proposed sanctions on LNG imports from Russia. The second controversial moment in time, we think, is also the current situation regarding the negotiations between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. In terms of perhaps other figures, as the Prime Minister said last year, for 24 billion cubic meters of Russian gas imported into the European Union, which is 19% of total gas imports into the European Union. In addition, last year, the European Union also imported 13 million tonnes of oil and imported more than 800 tonnes of enriched uranium or fuel. 5 member states imported enriched uranium or uranium-related services from Russia, and 3 member states imported Russian oil. Yesterday, I had meetings with all the top representatives of the most important energy companies in Slovakia, and we really talked about the consequences that this decision of the European Commission may have. We are very clear that we have to diversify our supply. However, it is absolutely not feasible with such a quick solution. Unless, of course, the aim is to exclude Russian gas and oil absolutely, at least regulatively, from the European Union market. So this is very difficult to implement because they are also being rolled out in the European Union and the European Commission. Debates about how we are actually going to control whether there are molecules of Russian gas or molecules of Russian oil in the European Union's energy system. And the result can be a very complex and very costly legal framework that may well be inhabitable. For example, when it comes to trading through third countries. Thank you very much for your attention. My guess is that if we want to completely remove enriched uranium from the Russian Federation, that is the European solution. We need to invest a minimum of 20 billion within Europe, and this process should take around 8 years. And then those capacities are not sufficient. The analyses that I read last night also say that if, for example, a stoppage of the flow of Russian gas were to be implemented, and we have long-term contracts between Gazprom and SPP until 2034, which are based on the fact that those Carpathians are simply not another option there, then we will come into a serious dispute with a partner from the Russian Federation. If the European Union bans us from using and taking this Russian gas, in which case, if the European Union pushes this through, we will vote 100% against it. We will ask who is going to pay for it. We are not going to pay for gas that we are not going to take until 2030. We have not yet done a policy analysis, and the authors of this document aim to. We think that it is mainly the Baltic countries that are pushing for the speedy adoption of such material, but I believe that when we get to the actual legislative changes, everybody's eyes will be opened and we will talk about it in a different way than we are talking about this document now. This roadmap does not correspond to the Versailles Declaration of March 2022, and there are things that threaten prices, threaten competitiveness, and, of course, threaten the interests of the individual member states of the European Union without affecting the Russian Federation, because these are small volumes. I don't know exactly now. I guess oil imports into Europe as far as the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary are concerned. The Czechs are already shaving off about 5% of that. I do not know if it is even 5% that I'm talking about small amounts. If we take, for example, the gas that went through Ukraine, it was 18 billion cubic meters against a total consumption in the European Union of around 420 billion. Unfortunately, these are the differential volumes that guarantee price stability within the European Union. That's so serious about the core thing. We are now diversifying. If we are talking about a new nuclear source, then of course we are trying to find a partner other than the Russian partner. We are not doing politics now. We are protecting the national interests of the Slovak Republic, economic interests, national interests, and we are also protecting the ability of the European Union to compete. As far as the visit is concerned, let me say it now in 3 sentences. If I have accurate information, there will be 2 social events. One will be on Thursday evening, that will be the heads of delegation meeting, then it will be the heads of delegation meeting lunch the next day. I'll lay wreaths at the tomb of the unknown soldier. That will be my main agenda item in Moscow. It's that show of respect for the past, and then I'll have a series. Now listen well to the bilateral negotiations. So try to tell me that this is not praise, but I am asking which Slovak politician has met and will now have a bilateral